Okay, we are live, 28 Pittsburgh Street, in the center of the nicest place in America, Columbiana, Ohio. Heartland Christian School, right in the heart of Columbiana, the heart of it all. Columbiana is like right in the heart of America, right there, right? And we're right in the heart of Columbiana.
I guess if you're laying on America's back.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, here at Heartland, we don't hardly ever do this, ladies and gentlemen. But we're starting, before we go into U.S. history, something that happened in the 1970s that goes along with our U.S. history. In 1973, which I realize we're beyond Nixon, but we didn't cover this. Did we even mention it in our Nixon presidency? But in 1973, the Supreme Court went outside of their constitutional bounds and decided to make a law. What part of our government makes laws? What branch? The executive, the legislative, or the judicial? What makes laws? Legislative branch makes laws. The judicial branch, the Supreme Court's job is to interpret the law, right? Well, in 1973, they decided that they didn't like the way things were going throughout the country and each individual state operating like the Constitution says and making laws. So they decided to impose upon the whole country a law that says that a woman has a right to kill her baby in her own womb. Well, if you didn't see the news last night or this morning, that there was a somebody at the Supreme Court, the most probable answer to this is somebody that wants women to have the right to kill their own baby, which is hard to even say, hopefully for all of you, leaked what is the probable decision that's going to be coming down soon. I thought it was going to be in March, and now here we are in May, that the Supreme Court's going to overturn Roe versus Wade. Some of your parents, some of you have been praying for this for 50 years, that this would happen. Now, it's a kind of a cause to rejoice if you're like most of us and your families, I think, who believe in the right to life and believe that it's one of the most incredibly insidious, evil things for a baby not to be in harm's way, and which should be the safest place in the world, its own mother's womb. And there's a strong possibility, it looks like, that that's going to be overturned. Now, the problem's going to be because there's a political part of our country who this is like their number one issue, that if a woman doesn't have a right to kill her own baby, then the United States should be destroyed. So there's a possibility, if this happens, like the leak says it's going to happen, that we're going to have another summer of people destroying things, because that's just, to them, that's unfathomable to think that a woman shouldn't have that right. Where, of course, to us, it's unfathomable that a woman would ever do that. Well, anyway, I'm just putting this on for myself too, to see where we're at now.
Vision was exactly that, the constitutional argument that the Supreme Court under Alito is stating. He's stating one of three main things. Number one, that this was properly a states' right issue and not a federal issue. The second main argument that he's making is the viability issue, that everything we knew about science back in 1973 about a fetus's right to life based on his viability has totally been discredited. And the third component of the decision, which I happened to review prior to this interview, was the fact that he even argued the racist origins, the eugenicist origins of abortion, and that the proponents of abortion had in fact wanted to disallow for the greater population of African Americans. And as a Latina, I have seen the devastating effects, not just on the African American population in this country, but also in Latinas. So when we talk about the women's rights issue, babies also are born girls. So they also have a constitutional right to life. And the other devastating opinion of this huge possible overturning of Roe v. Wade is the fact that they are discrediting the fact that there's a constitutional right to an abortion. This is huge news. This is groundbreaking, along with the unforward disclosure. That's going to be set aside for now. But if this decision stands, it's going to be groundbreaking, first and foremost, because it goes back properly to the states. So we're going to see a revolution in terms of how Roe v. Wade and abortion rights are handled in this country.
You bring up race, obviously. Karen, you said something about it, Esther as well. Karen, I actually want to go back to you on this because Justice Alito did write on this in part, saying some such supporters have been motivated by a desire to suppress the size of the African American population. It is beyond dispute that Roe has had that demographic effect. A highly disproportionate percentage of aborted fetuses are Black, end quote. Karen, I'll just get you to respond to that piece from Justice Alito.
Well, I don't believe, Sean, that's been supported by any factual information that we've had before us. I think that the reality is that Blacks and other disenfranchised don't have access and have to struggle with supporting children that they just can't afford. We're talking about situations where people just don't have the means to exercise the right that they want to and have control over their own bodies. So I respectfully disagree.
There's been a lot of reaction pouring in as we have seen protests gather outside the steps of the Supreme Court. The president also weighing in. I'll read part of his statement. It came out about 30 minutes ago, saying in part, quote, "We do not know whether this draft is genuine or whether it reflects the final decision of the court. If the court does overturn Roe, it will fall on our nation's elected officials at all levels of government to protect a woman's right to choose, and it will fall on voters to elect pro-choice officials this November." Nan Hayward.
Okay, so we can end there because we gotta get back to our history, but if you understood what she just said, that the most viable reason that this happened is because somebody, for the upcoming November election, somebody on the left, the Democrat Party, leaked this information to rile up, because right now all the polls are showing that Republicans are going to win the House and the Senate in November. They need an issue to really rile up the people and get them emotionally involved in the upcoming summer and the election. So this has always been, for some people, their number one political issue. That, again, they'd be willing to go to civil war to protect a woman's right to kill her baby. It just doesn't make sense to the Christian mind, but that's a very important thing to them. Does that make sense? And the whole historical aspect of it is America's existence is based on the Constitution. And the Constitution does not give the federal government power. It only gives them certain powers. If it's not listed in that power, they don't have that power. And the 10th Amendment, part of the Bill of Rights, the first thing they did after the Constitution was passed, says that if it's not listed in the Constitution, then Washington, D.C. doesn't have the power. Columbus does, or Helena does, or Boston does, or Albany does, or name some more capitals. Austin does, right? It's the states that have the right to decide that. So now the Democrats, if you saw what they're calling for, President Biden, is that, hey, if this happens, well then motivate the voters. You got to get out there and vote for people in your particular state. They're going to make sure that they put it in law legislatively that babies can be killed in their mother's womb. So, questions, comments? Again, very, very, very big issue that's been weighing on the soul of America for 50 years. And prayers from your grandparents and your parents, and maybe you, I hope yourself, hoping for this day. Now, the caveat is, if this decision happens, does that mean that abortion is illegal in America? The answer is no. What happens if this happens the way it's being reported is that Ohio will determine whether abortion is legal in Ohio. And California will determine it in California, and New York, and Texas. And every state, as it should be, according to the way our country is set up, will have the right. The voters in that state, the legislatures in that state will make the laws for abortion. So in Ohio, this is how it came to the Supreme Court. States like Ohio and Tennessee and Texas and other states have made laws making it harder to get an abortion. If you're like old enough, not that many years ago in Ohio, we passed what was called what's it called? Anybody? Heartbeat law, which says that if there's a heartbeat and you can't, it's a living being, you're not allowed to have the abortion. Well, that made a lot of people mad. And a similar law was passed in Texas, which brought it to the Supreme Court. What's the deal here? Are states really allowed to do this? Well, according to Roe v. Wade, no, because the federal judicial system said can't be illegal. But states were doing it anyway. So now it's coming to conclusion here. The Supreme Court's going to say, that decision in 1973 is no longer valid because it wasn't made on proper constitutional grounds. Properly, it's an issue that every state has to make. So prayerfully then, Ohio would remain a place where we don't condone killing babies. Isn't that kind of weird to have to say? But other states, if their voters vote, they can kill babies. Has anybody heard this news? There's a state recently that was trying to pass a law. I don't think it passed, or maybe it's still in process, where they wanted to make it okay to kill the baby after a month post-mortem. Did you hear about that?
I think there would not be any investigation of infant death.
Okay.
Up to 28 days after.
Up to 28 days. So, okay. So, not that it's not legal to kill the baby up to 28 days, but infant mortality happens a lot. So, there won't be an investigation to charge you for killing a baby. That's how far we've gone in some places. Does that make sense? There's been laws passed that if the baby survive, I've heard a woman speak. Anybody ever heard this woman who survived an abortion? She's one of the biggest advocates for not babies. She's like 30 some now, I think. But there's been laws they passed laws in states where even if the baby survives, it's just the evil is like hard to even comprehend. Here you are, a doctor. First of all, you're doing something, you're just arbitrarily deciding yourself you're going to kill a human life. And then the baby survives the abortion, and you don't try to save the baby. There's no hiding, like, you can't see the baby in the mother's womb. But the baby is there now in front of you. And you're not going to try to save the baby. And some places they pass that as a law that you don't have to. And one of our recent presidents, when this issue was brought up in Illinois, kind of got around not voting for it by not voting at all. Obama. There was a big issue made in 2006, I think, in Illinois, before he became president, that born alive. The baby's born alive after it was supposed to be aborted. And the thing was, hey, don't we have an obligation to save the baby? And of course, the people that are advocating for, because the holy grail is a woman's right to choose. And that trumps the baby. So out of the 60s, with the revolutions that came out of the 60s, the sexual revolution, the women's right movement, all of that, the race revolution, all that stuff that was going on, what came out of that was that the most sacred thing to some people politically is that a woman has a right to do whatever my body, my choice. You've heard that phrase before, including killing her own baby. That's the society we produced out of all the societal chaos from the 60s that we talked about. We didn't get into this part of it. We got into the race in Vietnam and all the other political stuff. But this gives us a chance to kind of go back and talk about what was happening in the late 60s, early 70s And we were relating it to what's going on today, the riots that happened a couple of years ago. If this happens, those people who hold that idea will probably get violent. Questions, comments? So if it happens, we rejoice because now every states can literally then, Ohio can literally then make a law that says, done. No, you cannot kill babies in their mother's womb. And the federal court couldn't do anything about it, as they shouldn't. On the other hand, California or New York can say you can kill a baby anytime, up to it's born. And if it's 28 days later, they won't investigate. By the way, you got another history lesson there, if you didn't know. Justice Alito, in his opinion that's been leaked, if it's real, that this whole thing was started by a woman named Margaret Sanger, who we look at her writings and her speeches and everything that went into this whole abortion industry, and she's very racist. And it's so unfortunate, the deceit that you get. There's a black woman on there just now that you watched. When the evidence is overwhelming, the statistical difference between the percentage of white babies that are born compared to black, and she sits there, it's scary evil to lie and say, there's no evidence that's true, that it's right. What? It's clear evidence, and this is what happens all the time in the media. And she sits there with a straight face and looks at the camera and says, oh, there's no evidence that says that that's true, when it's a preponderance of the evidence. The numbers are clearly there. This affects the black population percentage-wise way more than the white population. And she's a black person. Wouldn't you think she'd be like saying, yeah, that's right. You know, everything else, listen, this is how important they think this issue is. Everything else that happens politically, it's always against the black people. Follow me here. But then she goes on there, and because it's this issue, then it's not against black people. You following? Every other issue you talk to that woman about, this liberal woman, crime, poverty, she'll say the system's set up against blacks. This issue, she won't say it. She won't admit it. Everything you hear in the news, how our country's divided, they will say everything, people like her, not the black people I follow and listen to and agree with, those people like her will blame everything on race. And now when you give them the clear facts that abortion affects the black community way more than the white, and the person that kind of got the whole abortion industry going in America in the early 1900s was definitely racist and had definite intentions to, hey, this would be a good way to limit up, these uppity blacks, since the Civil War, they think they got this freedom and everything, trying to be equal to everybody. Well, one way we can just encourage them to all abort their babies, because, it's tough to be black in the world. And it'd be hard to raise your baby because, you don't have a very good income. Hey, let's just promote abortion in all these black communities. And they've been successful. So it's something against blacks, but yet for this issue, she won't go there because this is their holy grail. No comments, questions? Great day for people like me and your grandparents and parents, and hopefully you that have been praying for a long time that America would end this scourge. Some people go so far as to say, we sing God Bless America and we pray for God to bless America while we're killing 63 million unborn babies over the last 60 years. 63 million. And this could possibly bring it in. By the way, another little side note, we've been winning for a long time. Because one of the things they've done in this industry is, of course, deceive and get people self-deluded to the point where you get convinced them, like they said there, that in 1973, it was so easy to convince a young woman, hey, you got yourself in this situation, but the baby's not, the baby's not viable, the word used, the baby can't survive. It's not really fully developed, so it's okay to end it because, and by the way, you can't see the baby. Even when my first son was born, the best I had was, you ever see the little black and white, just a sonogram, where it's just shades of black and white, you kind of see a form of a baby, you've all seen that, right? Well, guess what you can do now? You can get 3D ultrasound where you got you might as well be watching it on TV of the baby in the mother's womb at maybe even 4 months, and you see, hey, you can't tell that young woman now, oh, it's not really even a human being. So they use the word fetus a lot, right? Because fetus makes it impersonal. It's not really a child, it's a fetus. That makes it sound like, oh, it's just a clump of cells. And if you can convince a young woman who's scared, who made a mistake, and now is going to bring a baby into the world, oh no, but you can convince them that, hey, you're not really killing a person. It's just a clump of cells. So we got to this point because we've been gradually winning over the last 20 years or so with all this technology and a woman, and we've had all these other institutions like Sophia Center in Salem, there's one there. Mrs. Pennington, I think, works at it, that you have all these places that have, remember in 5th grade, we did that fundraising thing with the baby bottles. I forget what that place is called, it's in Youngstown. But anyway, the Women's Center or something. We have all these places that we've been winning for a while, and now it's coming to culmination where we're going to get judicial victory. But the battle's not going to be over, because for them, the battle's kind of really just going to start. So we have to continue to pray that, like Bernie Sanders says, hey, it's time for, or Biden says, it's time for these individual states, you got to get to the election and vote for these people that are going to make it actually the law by the legislature that a woman can have an abortion. We've got to fight with truth and love just as strongly to make sure we elect people that we know will not allow killing babies to be a thing. How can America be blessed by God, and at the same time, we are condoning and even saying it's legitimate to kill 63 million people in 60 years? I dare call them people, humans, not fetuses. That wasn't supposed to go on that long, but questions, comments, refutations? How many didn't know anything about that till now? Probably, right? I mean, it just came out. Just broke the news last night. And I'm sure you weren't watching the news before you went to bed or when you got up in the morning. Unfortunately, you're living in an era where whatever you just said, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, that's the news. Unfortunately. All right. Hey, Andy, we're just getting back into the swing of things after this long break, right? So yesterday I went through Nixon again. Today I'm going to do it much faster, but you won't be able to say come Friday that, oh man, that was so long ago, I forget everything about Nixon. So in the next less than a minute, maybe, you're going to see all the information again. Derek's up here taking it all in, trying to use that photographic memory to remember things like Spiro Agnew and Nixon got elected because of all the chaos in 68. He's going to be the president of law and order. And then most of you probably will never forget the Kent State shootings. You know about the lunar landing. These things that are put in place now in the federal government to regulate our lives, which Americans generally say, yeah, we need some regulation. And then Nixon first visits China and Russia. That's a big deal because they're communist countries and they are enemies of the United States. If you're being realistic, they are. And then ending with the shameful resignation of I am not a crook, Richard Nixon, as at least he did one good thing there at the end. And instead of dragging it out and continuing to defend himself that he's not a crook and putting America through this extrapolated, divisive issue, he says, I'll just resign. And that brings us to General Ford. So we started Ford yesterday.
General.
Did you say general?
No. That's not.
Whoop!
Really cool.
How far did we get yesterday?
November.
What is it?
1974.
Right here? Yeah. Yep.
Kernel, like popcorn kernel.
The unelected president continues. As you probably would guess, the Democrats win what's called midterm elections. Today is primary day in Ohio for the midterm election. That one that, because we elect every 2 years, right? Next year you'll have civics, but you might remember that people that serve in the House of Representatives, they have to face election every 2 years. Senate faces it every 4 years. But of course, you don't elect 100 new senators every 6 years. You don't elect 100 new senators every 6 years. They elect 1/3 of the senators every 2 years. Does that make sense? Senators serve for 6 years, but we don't want to have a chaotic government where we have, theoretically, you could have all new 535 new Congress members, right? So the Senate, 1/3 every 2 years. So then over 6 years, everyone faces re-election. Does that make sense? And this is called a midterm year because it's not every 4th year. Every 4th year is called a presidential election. This is called midterm, like it was in 74. And with all the stuff that's going on with Nixon and the Watergate, then the Republicans are going to face defeat, right? Just like the prediction is, with everything that's going on with Biden, Democrats are going to face, which leads to some people's idea, why was this leaked? Why was the Supreme Court, the court decision leaked? Because they weren't ready yet. Who knows when? Maybe next month. But you got to get people riled up. It's May. It's primary season. You've got to get, if you're a Democrat, your base of people riled up and into this because they're looking at the polls. They're like, the Republicans are the ones fired up. Everybody, Biden's doing such a horrible job. We got to figure out a way. We can't rally around Joe. We got to figure out a way to get people emotionally involved in this election. And again, I don't understand it. You might not understand it. I hope you don't. But for some people, the right to kill a baby is like number one on their list. Like, hey, what's your most important political issues? The right of a woman to kill the baby in her own womb. Can you understand that, Trey? Ford's the first one to visit Japan. So now we've got presidents that are going outside of Europe and they're starting to visit places like communist China, communist USSR, and communist, or not communist, but generational enemy, Japan. So that's a big deal. And I think we talked yesterday about how a lot of people that are in their 80s today, I think I've said it before, still very anti-Japanese because of Pearl Harbor. And this would make some people mad that we're even having friendly relations with Japanese. Well, funny how history repeats itself. The inflation rate is on the rise in the early to mid 70s. Here in America, you may have heard your parents talk about, and Mr. Franklin's mentioned a few times, this I word called inflation. Some of it has to do with gas prices. some of it might have to do with your parents. You may have heard them come home from the grocery store moaning and groaning about how much they just spent at the grocery store. Because inflation is on the rise again, and in the mid-70s, it was even higher than it is right now. Although there's a lot of fear that it's going to go higher in the summer. By the way, for historical purposes, you should know that the average inflation rate is 3.6%. So if every year prices go up by like 3%, that's kind of like normal for economic year to year in the United States, right? Like you all know that a car today, just a regular sedan, costs 20-some thousand, and when I was your age, it only cost like 4,000. Same car, right? And you accept that as kind of like, hey, that's what happens throughout time. But when inflation is when that price rises really quickly, right? Let's say that $22,000 Sentra, I'll pick that because I have one, in 5 years costs $40,000. That could be a problem, right? For people who just want that, nothing special car. Now they got to pay $40,000 for it. That could be a big deal. And if inflation is at 10% for 10 years, do the math. That means the price doubles. So that $20,000 car in 10 years is $40,000 instead of 50 years later. The price doubled, or even 20. Okay, so Ford puts in this program. Fun name. Win. We got to win. We got to beat back this thing that's messing with our economy called inflation. So we're going to whip inflation down. And all it really was it wasn't really a whole bunch of legislation. It was just the president using what's called the bully pulpit and going before the people and saying, hey, we've got to change. Here's how we can beat inflation. We can start saving more money. Stop spending so much. Start being more prudent with your purchasing. Just like people are saying now. Hey, you don't like gas prices? Here's an idea. Drive slower. Drive fast. Waste gas. You don't like the gas prices? Drive less. Don't make unnecessary trips. Instead of going to the economic reasons for the inflation, put it on the people to say, hey, you can do this to beat inflation. So whatever was going on with the government and their influence on the economy, Ford was saying, okay, we're going to do what we can. And usually here's what governments do. They think to fix everything, what are they going to do? They're going to raise taxes, right? Or print more money. So you in 5th grade learned that the main cause of inflation is too much money, right? So you believe it or not, there's politicians that think the way we get out of this inflation thing is, again, there's people that think stuff that you can't even understand if you're 3rd grade. Then we're going to print more money. Because if it costs a lot for you right now, what do you need? You need more. Any 3rd grader knows that, Emily. You need more money. Wait. So if there's more money, Emily, and there's the same number of goods, what's going to happen to the price? It's going to continue to go up, right? These people work in our government. They're educated. They've gone to like Harvard, Yale, those places. And these are the ideas they have, Riley. Bad news again. I hate to keep being the bearer of bad news in U.S. history. But for 10 years, American soldiers have been fighting and dying in the fields of Vietnam. And in April 1975, of course, we took almost all of our troops out by 73. But in April 1975, the ultimate happens, and the North are overrunning the South. And when I say overrunning, we don't get into the details of they brutally went through the South and defeated them. And that's why most people say, no longer can you say America's undefeated in war. because Vietnam goes as a
By
loss.
1974, North Vietnamese troops had violated the Paris Peace Accords. It was clear.
By the way, one of the issues America faced all through the Cold War was we tried to negotiate peace with either Soviet Union or negotiate limiting our nuclear weapons or negotiating it all with communists. And we think we have an agreement, right? When Nixon took the troops out, they met in Paris, remember the Paris Peace Accords, and both sides agreed we're going to stop fighting. So the North, they stopped fighting for a few months. And then once the American troops were out, what'd they do? They don't care about some agreement. They don't live by the same standards that we do. This applies to the world politics, and it applies to our national politics on something like abortion. We have to fight the battle with truth and love. Guess what? The people that want to fight for the right to kill babies, they don't care about truth and they don't care about love. They care about getting what they want by any means necessary. And our job is, we have the hard job of saying, okay, we can't use their tactics because we're Christian first. So we got to somehow, and again, I think the amazing thing is we win. We're winning. It's amazing that we're winning. Because we have to fight with basically both hands tied behind our backs, and we're fighting with our hearts and minds while they're fighting with going out on the street and burning things down and threatening people and threatening violence and using hate, while we have to win the battle spiritually. It's amazing that we ever win. But be of good courage, because look, we're winning. Donald Trump got elected. Probably twice. How does that happen? If you look at the news, you look at your social media, you look at how ridiculous our culture is, how did that even happen? Because it seems like there's no way that could happen. But it does. I guess we'll pick up this tomorrow. I got too sidetracked today. But it's a sad day, because what this says is that we're lost. We have to admit America lost. By the way, we'll start tomorrow with American troops didn't lose the war. America lost the war, but not our military. This didn't happen when our military was there. American politicians lost the war. So America lost. Loss isn't on fighting soldiers. Still undefeated. Heavyweight champions of the world. It'd be like you're in the ring, you fight, and the manager just throws in the towel.
Just like Rocky should have played.
Haunted him. You had to go take care of him. You had to.
Like a unified.
He had to avenge, and he brought the whole world together. The Russians were cheering him. He ended the Cold War right there.
He saw.
You know biology too? You're incredible.
I'm the first one here. You know what you just said about. I'm the first one sat down. The first one to change this. Oh, no. No!
Take don't all four.
My sister. Back here, so we were at church. So moving on, wait. My mom was slamming. Her fingers were in the door, and her fingers, she broke it. My mom was like, I got the same desk.
Nothing you retire. Wait, what? How'd you get, wait, what? Where's your big desk? You put your big desk, oh wait.
It's a different. Yeah. I see it. Okay.
I need it, right? So for this packet, what should I say? What is packet?
Look at my note.
Yes. Oh, still there.
This should be a daily thing.
Should I say?
I like Ike. Who's Ike?
If I could be like President Eisenhower, you know him?
Oh, you know, yeah.
Hi there, Meredith.
How well do you